Hey guys, so today I am tackling a very difficult topic to talk about, and one that could potentially be controversial in Christian writing and reading circles. But I'm going to tackle it because it's something that we need to talk about. So, I'm going to play a short video here of a problem that I had a while back when I was first starting out, when I was planning Awakened Origins, the 5th book in the Mystic series, and it's my Christian vampire clean paranormal romance. It's, crazy, kind of a rare genre, not really a crossover between Christian clean romance and vampires, werewolves, and supernatural stuff. That's not a thing that really happens. And so when I was writing the 5th, God really inspired me for this series, and it may sound weird, but he did. And I didn't have too much trouble until I got to Awakened Origins, when I decided to do the first supernatural creatures, the first vampire, the first werewolf, the first siren, that sort of stuff. And I had a lot of trouble figuring out how to make it true to biblical history while at the same time trying to make it true to historical, I just had a hard time finding the balance and how to make it to where it was still really good and really entertaining and fictional, but being true to the Bible and actual history. So here's a short clip of that, and then once we watch this little clip, we can see, I'll kind of give the answers and kind of go from there, talking about the topic of Christian fiction combined with paranormal, supernatural stuff. Hey guys, so I thought as my fan group, you guys would want to know a little bit more behind the scenes. I know that this isn't just a group of fans of my stuff, but you guys are we're all nerds, we're all book readers, and some of you may be interested in more of the behind the scenes stuff of writing. And this is not a spoiler for anything that I'm currently working on, and it's currently not a part of the Million Word Challenge. I have this series called the Mystic series, and it's basically my own vampire, werewolf, supernatural creature type series. And it's a Christian series, so yes, my vampire is a Christian and he believes in God, and it's still epic and really dramatic and everything. Currently, there are 5 books written in the series, and I'm really trying to plan book 6 and book 7 right now. And here's the complicated part. I decided to go back to the first supernatural creatures, the first mystics as I call them, the origins. And they were kind of a bit of a problem in the last book, and I want to consistently bring them to more problems in the future. And this book, in book 6, I really wanted to get into the origin story, like where did the supernatural creatures originate from? The problem is that I'm a huge history buff. That's not a problem, but because I am a history buff, I decided to make them very old, very ancient. One of my vampire side characters is Sun Tzu. He is actually a historical figure, and he wrote The Art of War, and his Art of War book has been war strategies for years. He was born in 500 BC. So since he's one of my oldest vampires, I knew that I had to make the origins older than that. So we're looking at 600, maybe even BC or longer back. And so I had originally settled on shortly after the flood, so Noah's descendants, obviously, because anybody during the flood except Noah's family would have been killed, and he only had 3 sons and their wives, so that wouldn't have worked. So it had to be after the flood. So at least I had a little bit of a timeline. I didn't think much of it until now. And you're also messing with vampires, werewolves, and supernatural creatures, so how do you start the origin of these creatures without going against the Bible, even though that's not biblical, because nothing exists like that. So how do I include God? How do I stay true to his word, stay true to biblical history, which is the true history, and still do research and find information on all this stuff? And how do I figure this out? I don't have answers to these questions yet. I wanted to give you an inside look into how complicated being a writer can sometimes be, especially when you're a Christian writer trying to write fantasy that's really, really good fantasy, especially with supernatural creatures like vampires and werewolves, and still being true to the Bible and including God in it all. It's complicated sometimes, guys. So, now that you've seen the clip, let's discuss this. So, eventually I just prayed about it and started working at it, and I went back and I decided, okay, when the flood happened, God destroyed everything in the world because it was completely wicked. Only Noah and his family was righteous and good, which means that any characters that I had could not have lived through the flood because that goes against the Bible. So my main goal be true to the Bible. That is always my goal anytime I write anything. So I was like, it has to be after the flood. So I was researching, and I was like, the Tower of Babel, it was people seeking to be powerful like God. And so they started building the tower, and God basically confused their languages, and that's when everybody scattered. So I thought sometime shortly before the Tower of Babel and during the Tower of Babel would be a good point for this. So the way that I started to portray it was the fact that man in humanity, if you read the Bible, has always been seeking more power and more to do our own way instead of God's way. That is a very human-like thing to do, and it's wrong, but it's what's happened over time. So I decided to portray the original people seeking out bad magic, basically, as humans going against God. They're seeking power that they shouldn't have. And from there, these spells were cast, and the first vampire was created, the first werewolf. A human was turned into the first vampire, a human was turned into the first werewolf, and so on and so forth. And magic is mentioned in the Bible. There was a witch of Endor, and she was able, King Saul actually basically got her to call up Samuel's spirit and stuff. So magic, I don't know how it all fits, but in my personal beliefs, it's all Satan and it's demonic in nature, and that's obviously very, very bad. So I wanted to portray this and still be true to the Bible and portray it as evil. Now, the way that I'm portraying it now is I'm still sticking with that. But my characters nowadays in modern times who are vampires or werewolves who believe in God, I don't feel that they personally are bad just because they're the result of evil done long, long, long ago. And that's how I'm trying to portray it now, because they do believe in God. So I'm trying to show the redemption process there, sort of. And that's kind of the direction I went. So here's the secondary problem with these things is, how in the world do you market something like this? Because I actually have pulled a Facebook group called Avid Readers of Christian Fiction, and they have thousands of members, and they're all very active, and it's one of the best groups I've ever seen in terms of Christian content. And I ask them questions all the time, like, how do you guys feel about this? How do you guys feel about that? To kind of get a feel for the readership that I'm looking for my books on marketing them. So I asked them how they would feel, because I had an idea. I really want to do more with my Mystic series because it's huge, and there's so much potential stuff I could do. There's historical fantasy I could do. There's stuff that I could do after the Mystic series. There's stuff I could do a little bit before the Mystic series, still in modern times. There's so much content. And so I had this idea for a vampire story going way back into the time when Israel fell to Babylon. I thought that siege would be a perfect time, and I thought throwing fantasy into there with the vampires and the werewolves would be a cool idea. So I asked them how they felt, and the response was very, very negative. A lot of people were like, no, vampires and Christianity don't mix, it's a no. And so that got me to thinking about my story as a whole, because they were just like, vampires and Christianity don't mix at all, much less if I said it in biblical times, with the intention of not actually doing anything from the Bible directly, just the setting is Israel falling to Babylon, which is a historical event. And so for me, it's a big struggle because my whole series is Christian fantasy, and it's Christian vampires, it's Christian werewolves. My goal as a writer is now to write books that Christians can read and enjoy without having to compromise our standards. So for example, I love vampires, I love werewolves, I love reading stories about them. The problem is that only secular writers write these things. And if I'm going to read a vampire story or a werewolf story, most generally, if I really want to, the book's going to be bad. It's going to have elements in there that I cannot condone as a Christian. And so as a Christian author, I want to write these kind of stories with vampires, with werewolves, with all kinds of creatures that I really like, but doing it cleanly so that I can be true to my belief system, so that I don't have to compromise my standards. And I know if I'm struggling with it, then there are other readers out there who want to read this stuff and might even be compromising their standards like I have to in order to read the books that we want. And instead of having to compromise our standards, let's just, actually let me write something that can be entertaining to you and still be true to your beliefs. And that's my goal as an author, which means crossing over genres that have never been crossed over before, and starting with vampires, werewolves, and shapeshifters, and sirens, mermaids, whatever supernatural creature you can think of. I want to do it because I love mythical creatures. I'm super geeky about it, but I love God, and I'm a Christian, that's who I am. And so now how do you market this? Because the Christian audience isn't going to want it because it's got mythical creatures and stuff in it. The secular audience isn't going to want it because you've got God in it and the Bible. So what do you do? And that's kind of the point where I'm at, and I don't know exactly how I'm going to market it. And I really want to make a difference and and set a standard, not just for secular fiction where, okay, now we have higher standards as Christians, we're not going to compromise, we need those clean stories, but also setting standards for Christian authors where let's write something exciting. It doesn't always have to be a contemporary romance, set in modern times. Like, we can do historical stuff, we can do fantasy, we can do sci-fi, we can do a steampunk, we can do whatever, as long as it's clean and true to the Bible and true to God. But just marketing this and getting readers to actually want it is the hard part, because if you're a secular reader, you're going to like the fantasy elements, but you're not going to want the Bible stuff. If you're a Christian, you might be turned away from the vampires and the werewolves and all that stuff, because in Christian minds, that doesn't mix. But the thing is, the key for me as an author is to portray it as true to the Bible and portray it as true to God. And so, it's just really hard to navigate this and figure out what to do. As I said, the response was extremely negative. Absolutely not. Vampires and Christianity don't mix. And even though I've tried to portray it true to the Bible, and where I've tried to be true to the Bible, and it's not, the typical vampire story where, oh, you die and you come back to life and now you're an immortal being. That's not how it works in mine. In mine, it's kind of like just a disease that makes people have extra powers that are vampire-like, and the consequences, you have to drink blood and you can't be in the sun. And that's true for the other, like werewolves and werecats and werebears and all kinds of other stuff, And it's just hard to figure out how to navigate the readership with this, and how a lot of people are just immediately turned away from it. And sometimes I'm kind of at a loss for how to deal with it, because I feel like I am in a very unique position that I don't know if any other writer, Christian author, has been put in this position before, where I'm kind of in the middle, in between two genres, and neither genre really wants to accept this. Because I'm trying to blend two genres that supposedly don't go together. But I'm hoping that when I get the books out there and when I can start doing this, that it'll be kind of a game changer for this genre, and that Christian fantasy, specifically Christian fantasy involving supernatural stuff, vampires, werewolves, all those types of creatures, can be a new thing, because we Christians shouldn't have to compromise our standards to read the kind of books that we want. And I know there's gotta be other Christians like me who want to read this stuff, but don't want to compromise my belief system just to have to read this stuff. And I feel like it's right and okay for me as an author, a Christian author, to write in these genres, as long as it's clean and not anything bad. Because the thing is, like, first of all, if you want to try to reach secular readers, you're going to have to meet them where they stand. You can't just write a book that's literally just heavy-handedly Christian, because they're not going to pick it up, they're not going to read it. They want fantasy, they want sci-fi, they want whatever genre that they want to read. So doing it in a clean way, with biblical themes laced in it, or with a lesson in there, or with, something pointing to the gospel, but with the fantasy elements, with the sci-fi elements, with whatever they enjoy, making it clean, it shows them that we can have better standards, that we can write this stuff, and that it's not just, that Christian fantasy is a real thing, and Christian sci-fi is a thing, and it can be really good, it can be really clean, and that leads them to God in a different way, because they're picking up a fantasy book and then they get a little bit of Christianity thrown in there, and they get led to God in a new way that they never thought of before. They get told the gospel in a new way that they never heard of before, and they're more open to that, because they don't really, it's not something that's obvious to them. And then on the flip side, you have Christians who are sometimes a little bit adamant about things being set in stone when it comes to the genres that are considered Christian. And most generally, when you think of Christian fiction, you're going to think of a clean contemporary romance between a guy and a girl in modern times, and it's just heavy-handed. There's a Christian theme, there's a Christian romance, and it always ends happily, and it's always just heavy-handed just toward the Christian side. And a lot of time, I haven't read too many of those, so this could be my assumptions, and I admit if I'm wrong, I apologize to anybody. And I don't mean to down this stuff. I love every Christian author who writes what God inspires them to write. There's nothing wrong with this at all. I'm just saying that the lack of realism is sometimes a problem, because real life's not always like that. You know, you have to have a villain, not in contemporary romance so much, but in fantasy especially, and in other genres. A lot of Christians today don't think it's okay to include a villain or even include evil because, oh, that's evil. But the thing is, if you portray evil as it's meant to be, aka it's evil, that means it's a bad thing. And so to have these good villains, you have the villains that have these dark powers. That's what's true, because yes, God is real, but on the flip side, Satan is also real, guys. Demons are real, and they are real, and they do attack, and they do that, and you cannot blind yourself to the work of Satan and what he does here in the world, because then you're going to get blindsided and he's going to attack you, and you basically won't know what's hit you because you're kind of focused only on God. Now, we're not supposed to focus on Satan, and God is in control, and that's not saying to fear him, fear Satan, or, you know, anything crazy like that. I'm literally just saying that you can't just pretend like Satan doesn't exist. And so for me, the realism of it is also portraying evil as being from Satan when you do these books. And so for me, portraying it as, okay, the vampires, the werewolves, the witches, the warlocks, whatever, they came about because humans did what they do best, and that is we sin. We turn against God, we try to get godlike power, and it doesn't work, and it's not meant to be. And that's how these creatures came to be in my story. And on down the line, you have these creatures are, you know, procreating and stuff, and so they have a lot of them now. And now my characters are Christians. They've been, you know, turned into this creature or that creature, becoming one or the other. And they're no longer human technically, but they are still Christians. They still believe in God. And I don't feel like that's a bad thing at all. And yet some people are not going to give it a chance. On both sides, the secular people aren't going to want to give it a chance because it's got God, and the Christians aren't going to want it. Some Christians won't want to give it a chance because it's got vampires, you know. And it puts me in a very hard position. And if you're an author like me who wants to write fantasy and wants to do this, like, don't be afraid, as long as it's what's God telling you to do. And for the longest time, I've struggled with God inspiring me for this series, and I never understood why, because I'm like, God, like, no offense, but this isn't typical. People don't read this stuff. Christians don't read this stuff, and this feels like it, I mean, on the outside it looks like it's not Christian. Why are you inspiring me to write this, you know? And yet he still is, and his inspiration has been very strong throughout this whole series. And I still quite don't understand why he wants me to write it, or what the purpose with it is, other than you know, giving Christians something different to read where we don't have to compromise our standards, because not all of us just want to read contemporary romances all the time. You know, for us, it's not always that, like, we want different stuff. We want fantasy, we want sci-fi, but we want to read these without compromising our standards. And to do that, we have to have books like this that are willing to go the extra mile and blend genres it shouldn't be. And the other thing is that my idea that I originally asked that group about was making a historical fiction set in the Bible times of the fall of Israel whenever Babylon took over. If you can do historical fantasy, what if vampires in Europe, you know, during the fall of Constantinople or something? That nobody would see that as wrong. I'm not taking anything from the Bible. I'm not taking any verses and twisting it. It's literally just the historical period. But yet the Bible is real, guys. The Bible is history. So why is it that biblical fiction is only considered biblical fiction? Why is it not considered history? Why can't you do something with why can't you write a historical piece set in Bible times? Because guess what? That actually is history. Even now, you know, I wouldn't consider this Bible times, but we are still living out history. Years from now, it's going to end up being history. But the Bible is true. Every word of it is true. It's from the Word of God. It's God's Word. It is God. It is living. And so the stories in there are not just Bible stories. They are true, which makes them historical facts. Noah actually happened. That's a historical time period. The fall of Babylon is no different whenever Israel got taken over, you know. And so to say that, okay, it's biblical fiction, it has to stay. And I understand genre making it labeling it correctly when you're marketing a book. I can completely understand that. But to say that you can't do that, I feel is not right. That's almost saying like, okay, leave the Bible is the Bible, and then you have historical, which is historical. The Bible is historical, so I guess I'm confused as to why some people see those as different things. And so this whole thing, I know today's topic has been very serious, and if you're still watching at this point, thank you for sticking with me, but this is a huge topic with writers and with readers and with Christians in both groups. And so that's what my channel covers, and I feel like this is a super important topic to cover, so that we can all find a solution to this, so that one day from now there might be a new genre, or that people can understand and be more open on both sides, and so that authors like me, and hopefully I'm not the only one out here, so that authors like me feel more comfortable putting this stuff out there, because these books have been laid on my heart. I'm sure there are other authors out here who have had books laid on their heart before, and it would be a shame to have these books laid on our heart and then for them not to be accepted just because they're, you know, different. And as long as they're true to the Bible, that's what matters. As long as they point to the gospel and to Jesus, that's what matters. You know, as long as they reach the lost or entertain a Christian and keep Christians from having to compromise our reading standards, our belief system just to read a good book, you know, that's the important thing. And I can understand the wariness of it, because you don't know, there are some Christian authors out there who label themselves as Christian, but their books aren't Christian. They have bad things in there. But when you have authors like me who are sincere, who are wanting to do this, who aren't going to include bad things in there, you know, it's a hard place to be in. And so I hope that this can kind of enlighten both sides and help us to kind of find a bigger solution. And like, if you guys are a reader or a writer and you're interested in this topic, or if you have an opinion, please put it in the comments below, because I would love to hear from you. I'm really interested to hear what everybody has to say on this without arguing or anything. It's just a curious thing for me, and it helps me figure out what to do in terms of writing these things, publishing these things, marketing them, labeling them, that sort of stuff. And if you're an author like me who wants to write this stuff but aren't sure where to go, or you're afraid, my first piece of advice to you is to pray. And if you feel like God is leading you to write this or to publish it, then do not let fear stop you. Do not be afraid to write what God lays on your heart, and don't let man change that about you. Don't let man take that away from you. But I also thought this was kind of a perfect topic to talk about: vampires, werewolves, sirens, witches, warlocks, that sort of thing, magic users, because Halloween's coming up, and I'm a personal Christian who actually really likes Halloween. I don't see it as an evil holiday. It's not to celebrate Satan or the devil. For me, it's holiday to celebrate mythical creatures, which I'm obsessed with and I geek over. So it's kind of just an exciting geek day about mythological creatures, and it's just really fun, and it's really geeky, and I have fun with it. So I feel like it's perfect to talk about, and I hope that this has touched some of you, that this can help some of you on both sides. And if you're a reader and this stuff makes you uncomfortable, then don't read it. You know, that's on, there are a lot of things that trigger a lot of different people, and if you don't want to read it, or if you feel like you shouldn't be reading it, then don't. By all means, that is very, very important for you to stick to your beliefs. And if you're a Christian like me who wants to read books that are more exciting and more dramatic, more intense, more suspenseful, more that just has more fantasy elements to it, that has more not necessarily gritty, that's kind of the wrong word, but you know what I mean, like a little bit more dramatic and gritty, realistic type fiction, do not compromise your standards to read it. Don't read a book if it's got a lot of cuss words in it. Don't read a book if it's got a lot of sex in it. Don't read a book if it's got, homosexuality in it. Don't compromise your standards just to read something that's really good, or that you think is good, or in the genre that you really, really love. I promise you there are authors out there that want the same thing, that are Christian, and hopefully you can find really good books that fit the genres that you like, that are still Christian and still really clean. So thank you so much for watching this video. Be sure to like this video, and please share it around so that we can start having discussions, so that we can start finding a solution to this genre mix problem between Christian fiction and paranormal, supernatural fantasy, I guess, if you want to call it that. Because we need to start talking about it. We need to start figuring out a solution for authors like me who want to write this stuff, and yet it's not a genre, and some people think it should never be a genre. Be sure to subscribe for more writing and reading videos. And I promise they're not all, if you're new here, they're not all this in-depth and serious. I try to make my videos really fun and really, helping and educational so that you guys can learn how to write, or, we can discuss reading things. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys next week.